Hi, everyone, and welcome to C-Suite to Main Street. I'm Jeanette Mulvey, the editor-in-chief of Co. by U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And today I'm joined by Vanessa Phillips, who co-founded Feel Good Foods after discovering how great gluten-free food could be. What started as her need in her own life led to her first deal with Whole Foods, and today Feel Good Foods is carried in 25,000 grocery stores across the U.S. Vanessa joins me today to talk about how she did it and what advice she has for you. Hi, Vanessa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure. So let's just jump right in. Let's talk about Feel Good Foods. Tell us your story. It's a little bit of a journey. So maybe you could just tell the audience how you ended up starting this business.
Yeah, of course. Well, to start, I'll just talk a little bit about what Feel Good Foods is. So, we are a natural frozen food brand. We specialize in frozen appetizers and breakfast foods that are very nostalgic, crave worthy, made with simple ingredients, and really kind of bring you back to some of those childhood favorites that you ate as a kid, such as like mozzarella sticks, mac and cheese balls, French toast sticks. So just all of those like really delicious foods that maybe you ate growing up, but that you wouldn't eat today because a lot of times with frozen, it's, made with ingredients that like don't make you feel good. So we're all about like bringing those foods back. And just with like ingredients that you could feel good giving to your body.
So you didn't just start out saying I'm going to start a frozen foods business. You actually your family was in the restaurant business, and then you were in the restaurant business. And then you were diagnosed with celiac. So you had a need in your own life that you took you on this journey. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I definitely knew from a very early age that I was going to do something, career-wise with food. I grew up in New York City, so was had very early exposure to a lot of different foods. Loved food from a very early age. All of my earliest memories as a kid are somewhat around food. And my family owned Chinese restaurants when I was a kid and bagel stores. So, grew up working in their restaurants and thought one day I'll probably open a restaurant. When I was in college, I started, just having a lot of different symptoms that I couldn't pinpoint, mostly like neurological, but also some like gastro, intestinal stuff. And kind of quickly started thinking about my diet and what I was eating and what could be the culprit. And when I was a sophomore in college, I was diagnosed with celiac disease, which meant that I had to go on, back then, especially like a very strict gluten-free diet. 20 years ago, gluten was not nearly as, well known as it is today. So I was incredibly limited in what I could eat. I, pretty much just like ordered food at a restaurant, very bland. And it just took me on a journey of figuring out like how to recreate some of my favorite foods, some of the foods that I ate as a kid, how to bring them back in my life, but in a gluten-free version. So it was kind of like a light bulb moment for me where I was like, okay, like this is definitely unexpected and challenging. And I was sort of like mourning those foods that I loved so much as a kid. But then like quickly, went into like problem solving mode where I just became, fixated on figuring out how to create these foods, but gluten free.
So originally, I think I have this, that you originally were serving them in a restaurant that you owned, Friedman's, which there are many of in New York now, which is a great restaurant. So originally you were serving them there, but then you started selling them for people to take home, particularly your dumplings, right?
So the way kind of like the Feel Good Foods began was in a restaurant. It was a different company because, owning a restaurant is very different than a consumer food brand. But we opened a restaurant and we decided that everything on the menu was going to be available gluten free. my partner was not gluten free, so we had gluten in the restaurant, but then we also sort of put like we had the menu where it was a dot next to every item that could be done gluten free. We soon saw that there was a dot next to everything, and we quickly saw that there was a huge need and huge market for gluten free diners. The restaurant was primarily like quick service cafe, focusing on sandwiches and salads and nostalgic, crave worthy food, but more like fried chicken and mac and cheese and so on. But the restaurant was also this like incredible R&D kitchen for us, where we were testing different recipes and trying them out as specials. And gluten-free pot stickers was the one food that I missed most going gluten-free. So it took us years of, kind of just like tinkering with the wrapper. And sometimes we would, try it as a special on the dinner menu. But really, it was mostly just me figuring out for myself how I could eat a dumpling again. And when we felt that we had perfected the recipe, we, with absolutely no knowledge on, retail CPG at all, we put the dumplings in a Ziploc bag, sent it off to Whole Foods thinking that, we would never hear back. And it was kind of just this dream. And we got an email back from Whole Foods, and they thought that the dumplings were delicious, and they decided to pilot it in 27 Whole Foods. And that was the start of Feel Good Foods and how we launched.
I mean, it's such a crazy story, but also I can so relate because nothing could motivate me more than trying to figure out how to eat a dumpling or a mozzarella stick. So I do understand the motivation. It's kind of unheard of that you could just pitch Whole Foods and get a yes. So they must have been really, really good. So they said yes. And then I understand that once they started selling them in the Northeast, that you actually relocated and really were like hustling between stores, doing demos, like really being very hands-on and involved. So can you talk about that decision, why you thought that was necessary first?
Yeah, I don't even think it was such a calculated decision. We were, we launched in 27 Whole Foods, and at that time really our only job was to spread the word. And we were very bootstrapped and scrappy. We hadn't raised any money. We really didn't know how to scale at that point. So it was just sort of like a no-brainer, like we'll just go to Whole Foods every day and we'll do it the grassroots way, which is, sample the product and get in front of as many consumers as we can. And I remember it was 4 months where we demoed at Whole Foods every single day for 4 months, actually twice a day. We would do 11 to 3 and then 4 to 7. And I look back at that time, and it was like it's such a precious memory for me, because it was really where I learned the most about the consumer and what it is that really excited consumers. I always felt like I was very close to our consumer because I felt that I was the consumer. But just being in front of, different consumers every single day and asking them like, well, what do you miss? And what do you like? And what do you look for when you shop? It was priceless. So I look back at that time, and it really sort of set, kind of like, paved the way for what was going to follow, just having that 4 months of being so intimate with our consumer.
Yeah, I think that's a really rare opportunity to have that kind of direct feedback. So what were you hearing the most, and did it change the product?
I think, today, most of our consumers are not gluten-free.
Mm.
As I mean, they might be gluten-free as a lifestyle choice, but most of our consumers today don't even realize that the product is gluten-free. I think it's like 85% of our consumers don't realize it. And I think so much of the reason that is because what I learned early on from the gluten-free consumer, which is that they just wanted and were looking for food that tasted as delicious as they remembered. They didn't want a separate menu. Obviously, they wanted to feel safe, and they wanted to know that what they were eating was 100% gluten-free. But they also, wanted to be brought back to a time where they could eat whatever they wanted, right? Like they have these fond memories around food and they wanted that back. So for us, we set the bar really high early on, creating a product where you would never know that it was gluten-free. It tasted just as delicious as a gluten containing dumpling or egg roll or mozzarella stick, and we always would make sure that it wasn't a product that like was good enough but even better than what you remembered eating.
So much of your brand, I mean, first of all, the name, Feel Good Foods, is like could be like feel good, like physically, but so much of your language around the food is emotional. And of course, we all know food, you can be very emotional about food, but it really seems that the emotion that you feel around food and eating and being with your friends and it's like no pun intended, but it's baked into your brand, like the emotional feelings around food. So, can you just talk? But you are a business. So, how do you maintain those emotions and that feeling of really speaking to the emotional part of people, but still running a business and having to make business decisions?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at sort of the product portfolio, like there's sort of a common thread there is inclusivity, and that a lot of our products, if not all of our products, are very shareable. And when I think about food, my favorite food memories aren't necessarily just related to the taste of what I'm eating, but the experience, like who I'm with when I'm eating it, where I am, what the occasion is. So, what I love about Feel Good Foods is the consumers will reach out to us and say, on Fridays my kids and their friends all come over and we make feel good foods and they're all eating it. Or I was hosting a dinner party the other night and we had feel good foods as an appetizer or hors d'oeuvre. So there's just so many fun, inclusive, celebratory occasions that are connected to feel good foods, and that's the emotional side, right? Like it's not just about the food. It's about the occasion. And we're really focused on that. I mean that's kind of like the driving force behind what we do. And there's always obviously business complexities that come with building any business and you there's highs and there's lows. But the sentiment behind what we do is inclusivity and bringing people together, and that I mean, that's really just like the joy of what Feel Good Foods is.
Yeah, it really comes through. I mean, even just in the packaging. Um, so I so the person you founded the company with, you mentioned was not gluten-free, but you were, and I gather from some of what I've read that you were different in many ways. So how even if you don't officially have a business partner when you're running a business, you have business partners. So you have lots of people that you work with who are different than you. So can you just talk a little bit about the importance of finding people to work with who are different from you, even if it's your employees or your business partner?
Yeah, I mean, I think having employees and a co-founder are very different. My co-founder and I, we were different in our skill set. He was, was a trained chef. So we actually met working at a restaurant together. We were both very young at the time. And he was the chef and I was front of the house. And he noticed that I wasn't eating a lot of his specials because they had gluten in them. So I told him, I would love to eat that, but I can't because I'm gluten free. And he loved the challenge and he was like, oh, let me see if I can make that for you gluten free. And from there I was like, make this, make that, and that was kind of like the start of our journey. And we had very different skill sets for sure, which I think is super important in a partnership. But we also had a shared love of food, and there was a chemistry in that. And that's super important too. So I think that, when finding a co founder, you have to have a shared chemistry, right? Like you have to both, feel really inspired by what you're building. And then the skill set piece, having some overlap is good, but, also being good at different things is really useful as well. When building out a team and kind of like the rest of the organization, I always. My philosophy is to surround myself by people who are smarter in the areas where I, feel weak or like I don't have as much expertise. I don't ever want to feel like I'm the smartest person in the room. So I'm always, looking for people who are experts in what they do. I just think that that's, going to lend itself to the most, well-rounded organization.
Now, you bootstrapped in the beginning, but you do have investors now. So, sort of the same question of how I know that sometimes people feel like, well, I'm pitching myself to an investor, but also you get to choose whose investments you want to take. So, how do you choose what investors to work with? Like, what's a good fit for you?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I think that I've gotten better with, time and experience. I think early on, it's something that every founder is up against. You're raising money. And I think that as you scale and you get bigger, you can, be more choiceful. It's a real watch out, right? Like who take capital from ultimately, like they're gonna be your partners, they're gonna have a say. So it is really important that you really make sure that there are shared values and expectations around timeline and all of that stuff before you take the capital. I think that that's like then probably the number one story. I've been really fortunate with that, but the number one story that I do hear from founders that have been disappointed and like who they've taken capital from is just not slowing down and running like a mutual vetting process when going through that. I, early on did bootstrap it so that, I didn't feel like pressed to take capital too soon or be hasty in that. And then because I, gave myself the time and kind of didn't grow as fast as we could have early on. But because I gave us that time and sort of that breathing room when we ultimately did a capital raise, I really made sure to partner with investors who I had a lot of shared values with. So I've been super fortunate with that. And, our investors are fantastic. And it's just all about alignment and really, giving both parties time to get to know each other.
You've come a long way from where you started making dumplings in Ziploc bags. Just what is like, if you could go back now and give yourself advice then, like, what have you learned that would have made your journey easier had you known it then?
Oh, wow. A lot. I would tell myself a lot. I think that the theme, throughout my career that I think about too is, I'm very solution oriented and, sometimes I'm not super patient and, I think early on, I expected results really quickly, but these things take time, and you have to be patient. I've learned the art of patience. So, everything that I've dreamed for Feel Good Foods has either happened or is happening. It didn't happen on maybe the timetable that I had wanted early on, but it is happening. And it's just, just staying focused and being patient and trusting your instincts and knowing that if you just keep focused, it will happen. But I do think that a big theme for me is just the art of patience.
Now, how do you know the difference between when you need to just be patient and when something's not working and you need to do something different?
Yeah, I mean that's a really it's a good question. I have very, and I think a lot of founders have this as well. I have very very strong instincts, and I think that just in general, if you really dial it in and listen to it, I think everyone has that internal voice and that gut, right? So I don't spend a lot of time lamenting when I have when something tells me like this is the move, I do it and I don't sit on it. But big picture in terms of like outcome or, really like wanting things to come to fruition, that's where sort of the art of patience is important. But when something, doesn't feel right to me, I act on it very, very quickly.
So, okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to belabor the point and ask you one more question about that because I think this is where it's really hard for business owners. Let's say that your instinct says, like, this is what I should be doing, but you're doing it and doing it and doing it and it's not working. Is there a point at which you have to say, like, I have to pivot here because this, like, is it data? Like, what is the thing that makes you say, okay, I thought that was going to be a great product, but no one's buying it. We have to stop making it. Like, how do you make that decision?
So I think it's like, there's big picture and then there's kind of like smaller picture, right? So like the big picture for me, which is the art of patience, is like building this brand, right? Like building feel good foods to, with this huge product portfolio to reach as many consumers I can and to be in as many grocery stores as I can. And that's the big picture for me. And that's where I'm not pivoting. But all the different, circumstances or, different projects, work streams, launches, all the things along the way are more tactical and that you do, I think, as a founder need to, be flexible and know when to pivot. But what I'm not pivoting from is the big picture. Right. So, like, I try not to get very hung up in like every single step. Right. Like, as long as I'm loyal and married to my dream, which is feel good foods, the obstacles along the way, sure, like my gut is going to tell me like, you know what, I loved this concept or I loved this idea, but it's not working and I can't be afraid to pivot because by holding on too long, it's actually going to hurt me from what I'm really trying to do, which is the big picture, which is building feel good foods. Does
Oh
that
my
make
God.
sense? So it's like,
Yes.
I think two things can be true at the same time, right? Like you can pivot, but also, be really patient and stay loyal to your dream.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, you said married to your dream, which is amazing. I love that. Yeah, what you said is exactly what I wanted to understand because what you're saying is you're not holding on super tight to everything. You're staying true to like your vision and knowing that in order to make that happen, you may have to change how you're doing it, but not what you're doing. So,
Right.
yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Last question for you is it's just our audience today are small business owners or people who want to start businesses and they want to be as successful as you are. And I think you would probably be the first person to say that owning a business is really, really, really hard. You're married to it, right? You told us like it is probably your life 24 hours a day. So, what do you think is the hardest lesson that you have had to learn as a business owner, like the most like the thing that maybe was the hardest for your ego or just like what was the thing you had to let go of? Like what was the biggest thing?
I think having no ego, number one. I mean, I know some founders might get an ego later, but if you're a startup and you're an early entrepreneur, I think letting go of ego is going to be really crucial because for me, I had a lot of no's. I had a lot of really discouraging, soul crushing conversations early on. Um, I had, multiple people, tell me that, I was on a road to nowhere, that I should go back to the drawing board, that I wasn't going to make it. And, for me, that fueled me. And it doesn't necessarily fuel everyone. I get that. But if there is gonna be ego or your ego is gonna get bruised quickly, I think that could be difficult for sure because, there's gonna be a lot of setbacks and there's gonna be a lot of reasons or signs why you should give up. Um, the one reason why I never did give up is because I believed in this brand. I still believe in this brand, so much that nobody in the world was gonna change my perspective on that. And, I just think having this unwavering loyalty to what you're building is so important so that when you do get a lot of no's and when you do get a lot of people who, might just like be mean about it, you can just stay really focused on why you're doing this, which is just the love of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation and I think everyone will be really inspired by you. So thank you very much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to our sponsors, H&R Block, Dell, Oracle NetSuite, and Walmart Business. Thanks to everyone for watching, and we'll see you at the next C-Suite.